I wanted to come back to Unit 7 and do a little bit something different, and I will probably do this throughout the rest of the units just to give you a little bit of information, a tip or two, and raise some things that I think are important in the translation. This would kind of call attention to and supplement the things that Mounts does gives you in his graded biblical reader. You'll notice that he's going to be changing his approach, which I think is a very good approach. He's been giving you more information as we move on through the units. He will be giving you less information. You'll be depended on to do more, and I'm not going to interfere with that. I think that's a good idea to keep you a little more focused on how to deal with the text, how to wrestle with the text. So anyway, we'll see how this goes. You let me know, give me some feedback on it, and let me know if it's helpful. And if it's not helpful to you, then I won't take the time to do it. But if it is helpful, I certainly would like to be able to help. I wanted to throw in a question here too, just to talk about phrasing for just a minute, to see how your phrasing is working out. If you could give me some feedback on that, I'd appreciate it. I'd like to know what you are learning about the text from it, not just what you're learning about the form of phrasing, but how is it helping you to learn something about the text? Are you able to see the main points and the main meaning of the text? And then, of course, the main thing is, how is it impacting your exegesis? Is it making a difference in the way you deal with the text and what you see in the text? And then, of course, the all-important question, what can I do to make it more useful? How can I help you to use that as a more efficient tool? All right, so I think as we look at this letter of James, I would encourage you to look at the letter, particularly this introductory passage in the letter, from the context of its date and the author and the recipients, and you need to come to a conclusion about what impact that has on the meaning of the verse of the passage. Did James write it very early, or does it come from later? Was it the brother of Jesus? What was his role as the pastor or pastoral leader in the church in Jerusalem, and how did that affect the people who lived out in the diaspora? So these are some questions that I think might help you. So I just want to run through verse by verse most of the verses and just point out very briefly some words, maybe some questions for you to think about. In verse 1, the question is, why did James use karain or karain, which means rejoice? It's the infinitive form of rejoice, instead of Paul's usual charis kai erene, which would be grace and peace to you. Just think about that, if you will, and see what impact that has on your thinking about the passage. And then in verse 2, I encourage you to think about the difference in the charan, the joy, the rejoicing, count it all joy, James says in verse 2, and happiness, as we talk about it today. I would say, for me, the main difference is happiness, as we talk about it today, depends on the present circumstances that we're in. Joy is that abiding state that we live in as a result of our relationship to Christ and as a result of the life that we live in Him. So anyway, I would encourage you to take a look at that. And then there is that word peripasmois that has to do, it could be translated either trials or temptation. And when you look at James, you're going to have to ask yourself the question, okay, what is he doing here? Is he talking about trials as in things that come to test us, or is he talking about temptations that come from Satan, or as James says it later, come from our own lust? So that's what you have to do, is to work that out. And then in that context, you want to ask, how does a peripasmos relate to dakimion, the word for testing, or like the testing of character in verse 3. In verse 4, James makes a really significant statement, I think, when he talks about the fact that trials finish us out toward perfection. We have trouble with that word perfection because we're not perfect, and I think that it might do us good to kind of take a look at that. In verse 5, he deals with wisdom. Think about your own definition of wisdom, what it means. For me, wisdom is understanding how to use knowledge. It's the right use of knowledge. It's not the education, it's not the IQ, it's not the information that you get, not even the understanding, but it goes beyond understanding to how to use and apply that. It's like multiple choice. If you have multiple choices, wisdom is knowing which of the multiple choices to make. So it is an important word for James, and you need to consider here, where does wisdom come from, and then what does the word didantos, it's a participle that means giving, what does that say about God? So I encourage you to take a look at that. And then in verse 6, what's your definition of piste, faith? That is very important, that we wrestle with an understanding of what that really means. And then there's a word that comes from kreno, I judge, or I evaluate, or it could have several meanings depending on its use in context. But here the form is a diakrenomenos, and it literally means to judge kind of in two directions. It's a wavering, a lack of. It fits into that context of what James has talked about as a man who lacks stability. It's kind of like where I grew up, we talk about the forks of the road, where you come to a place where the road divides, and you learn pretty quickly you can't take both forks in the road. And that's what I think James is covering here. He's saying when you come to a point of choice, you need to have the wisdom to make the right choice and to firmly go in one direction, under the direction of the Spirit, of course. But what it does, it means that we don't hesitate, we don't waver, we don't go back and forth, try to go both ways. So I think it's an important concept. So just take a look at that, if you will. He also talks about the wave metaphor, so I would look at that. That adds to that concept of unsteadiness and helps us see a picture. He does another thing in verse 8 where he uses the word dipsukos, which means to be two-souled, literally. So it's thinking two ways. It adds to that picture of unsteadiness. You can't really think two ways, to be two-faced or something like that. It's not quite that. That's the word for hypocrite, but that's the kind of concept it is. And then there's another word here, and I failed to write it down, but it starts out. It's the word, the alpha privative. You remember that? That's the word. I mean, the letter of the alpha that negates the meaning of the word, and then it uses the preposition kata, and then it uses the verb for standing. Literally, it means not standing down. So it's another word that talks about that when it's put together with that wave metaphor and the two-souled metaphor, then it just adds to that concept of unsteadiness. And then in verse 9, he begins to talk here about the poor and the rich, and he does that in several places. And of course, while the emphasis on the rich and the warning against the rich mistreating the poor and having a wrong attitude, even about his own riches and about life, it is also true that James, it seems to me, is saying that neither poverty nor riches is what we need to cling to and hold on to and have our confidence in, because both are going to pass away quickly. There's no virtue in either one. Anyway, I hope this helps you a little bit. Probably most of them won't be quite this long, but anyway, let me know. Give me some feedback if you will. Let me know if this is helpful to you.